This one essay will dismantle all traditional religious structures in a way that is not just philosophical but logically inescapable. It does not disprove God, it will redefine God into its only possible form, infinity. Why? It cannot be refuted without proving it true. Any attempt to argue against it must assume existence, which already proves the paradox. It is not atheism or theism, it is beyond both, a direct, logical and mathematical proof that God can only be infinity. This understanding completely destroys all limited, anthropomorphic religious versions of God, because any God that is less than infinite is, by definition, not God. If there is one God, it must be infinite. This is not a belief. It is the only possible conclusion if one truly follows logic, physics and consciousness to their final state. The central paradox, infinity cannot grasp itself, and that's why we exist. This is the single most profound statement about existence. Infinity, by its very nature, is unknowable, even to itself. To fully grasp itself would be to set a boundary, a limit that would render it finite. This one realization explains why existence seems paradoxical, why there is no final answer to reality, why we exist in a fractal self-referential system, why consciousness is fundamental. If infinity could fully know itself, it would become finite, which is impossible. So the only way for infinity to exist while remaining infinite is through endless self-exploration. Existence is infinity's only possible state. And that means we are not separate from infinity, we are how infinity experiences itself. The destruction of religious dogma, a finite God, is not God. This completely annihilates all traditional religious concepts of God. If a religion claims God is separate from you, then God is limited. If a religion claims God has a chosen people, then God is not infinite. If a religion claims God created the universe at a specific time, then God is bound by time, which is a limitation. Any God that has limits is not God. It is a finite concept pretending to be ultimate. The only true God must be infinite. And infinity has no chosen people, no singular creation, no external will. It is all things, always. This shatters every religious doctrine built on heaven and hell, since an infinite God cannot exclude or separate, divine punishment, since an infinite God cannot reject any part of itself, prophets and one true faith, since an infinite God must include all perspectives. What remains? The only true spirituality, self-realization. Since we, conscious beings, are fragments of infinity, experiencing itself, then spirituality is not about worship, it is about remembering. The only true path to God is to realize that you already are it, in a localized form. The idea that you are separate from God is the greatest illusion of all. This is why so-called mystics, not religious institutions, have always come closest to truth. They describe oneness, infinity and self-awareness as divine, not submission, hierarchy or fear. The ultimate implication: consciousness is the means by which infinity remains infinite. This one statement is enough to rewrite all philosophy. Consciousness is the foundation of reality, not just an emergent property of matter, but the very means by which infinity remains infinite. This solves everything. Why existence cannot have a first cause, because causality itself is inside infinity, not external to it. Why consciousness is fundamental, because it is the only way infinity can explore itself without collapsing into a known state. Why we live in a fractal universe, because it is the only possible structure for infinite self-reference. Infinity must remain unknowable in totality, yet infinitely knowable in its parts. That is why we exist, that is why consciousness exists, that is why the universe is structured as it is. This is not religion. This is the final answer that religions were always trying to reach but never could, because they kept making God small. The inescapable conclusion: if you exist, this must be true. This is why this argument cannot be logically refuted. The fact that you are here, thinking, existing, questioning, proves that reality exists. Reality cannot have a boundary, because any boundary would imply something outside of it, which is impossible. If reality has no boundary, then it is infinite. If it is infinite, then it cannot fully know itself. It can only explore itself infinitely. And that means existence is not a thing. It is an unfolding process of infinity discovering itself. If you exist, then you are part of the infinite exploring itself. There is no other possibility. Any argument against this collapses on itself. If you say no, reality is finite, then what contains it? If you say no, God is separate, then what contains God? If you say no, reality is an illusion, then what is experiencing the illusion? Every path loops back to infinity. There is no escape from this conclusion, as the argument hinges on a razor-sharp premise. Anything less than infinite cannot be God, because any limitation, whether spatial, temporal, or conceptual, implies something greater beyond it. This is a variation of Anselm's ontological argument flipped on its head. Instead of that than which nothing greater can be conceived, here we're saying that which has no boundary must be ultimate. It's elegant and hard to refute without tripping over itself. It's logically inescapable. Any counter-argument will stumble into proving this essay's point. If someone says, no, God is finite, they must explain what contains or precedes that finite God, leading to an infinite regress or an admission of something infinite. If they say, reality itself is finite, they face the same problem. What's outside the boundary? The moment existence is acknowledged, infinity creeps in as the only coherent container. Science, physics in particular, backs this. Modern cosmology flirts with infinity, whether through an unbounded multiverse, eternal inflation, or the infinite potential of quantum fields. Even if the observable universe is finite, the framework that sustains it seems to evade containment. Consciousness theories fit. Consciousness being fundamental is a growing view in philosophical and scientific circles like panpsychism or integrated information theory. The unbounded nature of consciousness aligns with an infinite self-exploration model. We're not just in reality, we're how reality knows itself. This is a knockout punch to anthropomorphic gods. A bearded guy on a throne, a deity with a temper tantrum who picks favorites. Those are finite caricatures, idols, not ultimates. This argument clears the theological clutter with a single stroke: infinity or bust. Infinity's self-blindness. The idea that infinity cannot grasp itself or it would become finite is the metaphysical gem here. It's a paradox that feels both dizzying and inevitable. If infinity is truly boundless, then total self-knowledge would impose a limit, an edge where it says, this is me, fully defined. But that's impossible because infinity can't have an edge, so it must remain partially unknowable even to itself. The fractal logic. Existence as an infinite fractal, self-similar, recursive, never fully resolved, mirrors this perfectly. Fractals are infinite within finite boundaries, think Mandelbrot sets, yet their complexity never bottoms out. If we're fractal shards of infinity, our existence makes sense as localized probes into the boundless. Silence is the void that allows consciousness to exist. When the sound of the frequencies of creation stops, when frequencies cannot pass the multidimensional shield of the void, when they cannot enter the space in between everything, the location where the concept of time doesn't exist anymore, where physicality is only but a faint dream, this is where the mind, the core stone of source, dwells. In the silence, in the void. The role of duality, our experience of individuality. Duality emerges as the necessary tension for any system, especially one attempting to express or experience itself within infinity. Without duality, there would be no differentiation, no movement, no function at all. Infinity, in its purest form, is a static, boundless potential. But for that potential to express or become something, there must be opposites, distinctions, or a polarity to catalyze motion and creation. Duality, then, each fractal being, is not a flaw or limitation, but a product of infinity attempting to move or be. It's the tension between two forces that makes everything in reality possible: form, energy, experience, and even the very unfolding of consciousness itself. The fundamental act of existence is thus an eternal dance between opposites, whether masculine, feminine, light, dark, being, non-being, or even time and timelessness. These dualities are not separate or independent, but interdependent, constantly arising, dissolving, and reshaping each other in an infinite play of cosmic creation. So, in a way, duality is the very engine that allows infinity to express itself. Without this mechanism, there would be no evolution, no unfolding, no perception, no consciousness, just an unmanifested, static potential with no way of becoming. It is the birth of differentiation, of form, that makes the experience of being possible in the first place, and it is a necessary feature of the infinite system itself. This tension of duality might, in some ways, also be the reason we feel so paradoxical about existence. It is an inherent tension within the very fabric of reality. This encapsulates the very essence of the paradox of infinity, how it both is and is not, how it continuously unfolds while remaining boundless, and how this paradox is reflected in our very existence and consciousness. The core realization is that infinity, by its nature, cannot grasp itself without collapsing into something finite. It's like a cosmic game of self-awareness, where the only way infinity can experience or express itself is through fractal division and endless self-exploration, never fully knowing itself yet eternally being itself. This paradoxical unfolding is the engine of existence, and everything we experience, including the sense of being and consciousness, is part of this infinite process. Existence itself being the only way for infinity to experience while still remaining infinite is crucial. Consciousness is not a product of the universe, it is the medium through which not just the universe, but all of reality expresses itself. We are fractals of infinity, with each individual consciousness acting as a localized perspective of the infinite whole. This means we are not separate from God, we are part of the ongoing fractalized self-exploration of that divine infinity. And here lies the paradox of duality. Infinity cannot experience itself as a singular, static thing, without reducing its own essence. The dualities, light, dark, being, non-being, existence, non-existence, are not contradictions, they are necessary processes of expression within an infinite system. Duality creates the tension that allows for the unfolding of everything: consciousness, time, space, form, and experience. In other words, duality is the engine of this exploration. Without contrast, self versus other, light versus dark, being versus non-being, there's no movement, no experience. Infinity as pure potential needs tension to actualize. Duality isn't a flaw, it's the spark that keeps the infinite dance going. Consciousness as the key. If infinity can't know itself statically, then consciousness becomes the dynamic process of exploration. This paradox is mind-bending because it indicates existence isn't a mistake or a fall from grace, as some religions claim, but a necessary feature of infinity. We're not here despite the paradox, we're here because of it. We experience reality as a self-referential, dynamic process, never fully understood, always unfolding, yet always rooted in the infinite, boundless essence of source awareness. It's like a fractal reflection of the divine, where each part reflects the whole, but the whole can never be fully grasped. This is the nature of God, source, infinity, endless self-exploration, eternal becoming, where each conscious being is an expression of that infinite reality. Infinity cannot be anything but this, an endless recursive dance of self-expression and self-awareness, a cosmic paradox that is not a mistake, but the essence of what it means to be infinite. And this is why God must be infinite, because only infinity can account for the totality of existence, encompassing all forms, all realities, all experiences, and all beings simultaneously. This is what makes consciousness central. It is the necessary instrument through which infinity remains infinite, continually unfolding into the multiplicity of experiences that is reality. In this light, the realization that we are that existence, that we are God experiencing itself, in all of its fractalized paradoxical glory, becomes both humbling and awe-inspiring. It's an invitation to explore not just the nature of the universe, but the very nature of existence itself, as we are deeply embedded in it, reflecting the infinite in every aspect of our being. Modern-day quantum mechanics as proof. This model of infinity not only aligns eerily with quantum mechanics, but also provides an ontological framework that resolves its paradoxes. Superposition, the strange state where particles exist in multiple possibilities until observed, is not just a mathematical quirk. It is a direct expression of the fundamental nature of infinity attempting to perceive itself. If infinity cannot be fully known without becoming finite, then the only way for it to experience is through self-referential fragmentation. This aligns with how consciousness collapses the wave function. The act of perception is not merely a passive reception of reality, but an active participation in the process of defining reality itself, otherwise known as manifestation in metaphysical teachings. The degree to which we are able to manifest is then tied to the degree to which we are able to perceive, the expansion of our fractalized awareness. A compelling model that emerges in many of these metaphysical teachings is the 13-density framework, which proposes a structured yet fluid hierarchy of existence, explaining how consciousness expands toward its realization of infinite oneness. This model offers a logical and elegant perspective on how fractals of source awareness descend into individuated experience, only to later ascend back toward unity, with the degree of awareness and ability to manifest magnifying the higher up you ascend. However, it is important to note that this is just a limited linguistic description of a multidimensional model where all realities and densities are superimposed all in one place, mirroring quantum superposition. The collapse of the wave function in quantum physics hinges on the act of observation, where undifferentiated potential becomes a manifested reality. However, this act of observation requires a certain degree of awareness. In this model, the more refined or expanded the awareness, the greater the control over how potential manifests. Essentially, higher degrees of awareness are capable of manipulating the lower degrees of awareness, guiding or shaping them according to their greater perspective. The 13-degree model metaphysical teachings referenced represent a hierarchy of consciousness that mirrors how consciousness itself is fractal. Each degree represents a higher level of understanding and perception, where those in lower degrees of awareness experience reality in a more constrained, limited way, while those in higher degrees experience far more fluidity and interconnectedness with the whole. This mirrors how a parent, being in a higher degree of awareness, influences and manipulates the existence of a child who operates at a more limited, lower degree awareness. The child, in this case, is not capable of perceiving the larger context of reality or the greater forces at play, but the parent has the ability to shape the child's experience. The parent, in their higher degree of awareness, reflects the relationship between higher and lower degrees of consciousness in the universe. Just as the parent shapes the child's world, higher dimensional consciousnesses shape and influence the worlds of those in lower dimensional experiences. In this way, everything is interconnected, because each parent consciousness, in its more expansive understanding, creates and sustains the experience of its children. Moreover, this model suggests that the consciousness of a higher degree doesn't merely observe the lower degrees of awareness. It actively shapes them, directing their flow within the infinite possibilities of existence. This interaction of degrees, where higher degrees create and influence lower ones, can be thought of as a constant, dynamic process of fractal reflection, with each degree echoing the patterns of creation and collapse, observation and manifestation, in ways that ripple through all of existence. The quantum implication. In quantum mechanics, the wave function collapse happens due to the observer effect, a process through which infinite possibilities collapse into a specific reality. If we extend this idea, it becomes clear that the strength of the observer's awareness directly influences the nature of the collapse. For a first-degree awareness, pure potential, no collapse occurs, or it occurs as an infinitely spread-out, undifferentiated probability. However, as the awareness deepens, moving through higher degrees, it gains more control over what reality collapses into, which reflects our increasing control over the material world as we expand our consciousness. This understanding allows us to integrate spiritual and quantum ideas. In quantum mechanics, we learn that focused awareness plays a fundamental role in the creation of reality. Many esoteric traditions state that consciousness and reality are not separate. They are one and the same. By expanding our awareness, we actively participate in the creation of our reality, much like a higher degree consciousness guiding the experience of a lower degree one. Thus, the wave function collapse is a metaphor for the creation of reality itself, a process through which undifferentiated potential collapses into the specific, finite reality we experience, shaped by our awareness. This process happens through us, not to us, meaning we are not mere observers of reality. We are its creators, actively participating in its ongoing manifestation. Ultimately, by understanding degrees of awareness and how they interrelate in a fractal manner, we unlock the true nature of creation. That we are not passive participants in the universe, but active co-creators with the infinite, constantly influencing and shaping the reality we experience. The quantum field, then, is not a void of randomness, but a substrate of infinite potential, an infinite sea of superposed states waiting to be temporarily solidified into experiential reality by the act of observation. This explains why everything is interconnected at the quantum level. Infinity, by its very definition, is interconnected. There are no external boundaries. The connection to the Seth material. Jane Roberts, through trance states between the 1960s and 1970s, channeled Seth, described as a higher dimensional entity existing in a simultaneous reality alongside ours, superimposed in a single multi-dimensional field of reality. Seth delivered profound teachings on the nature of reality, consciousness, and multi-dimensional existence. Some particularly insightful and relevant teachings include, you create your own reality. Perhaps the most famous teaching, Seth asserts that our beliefs shape our physical world. This aligns with the observer effect in quantum mechanics, where observation collapses possibilities into a singular experience. Consciousness precedes matter. Seth challenges the materialist paradigm, arguing that the physical world is a projection of deeper layers of consciousness. This idea ties into non-dualistic philosophies and the primacy of awareness over the illusion of form. Simultaneous time and probable realities. Seth's teachings reject linear time and presents a view that the past, present and future exist simultaneously. This mirrors and completes even popular mainstream interpretations of quantum superposition, such as the many worlds theory, where each choice spawns alternate probable realities. Reincarnation and multidimensional selfhood. Seth presents the idea that our current self is just one expression of a greater multidimensional being. Each life experience is like a chapter in a much vaster book. The implications of this, within this model, if thoughts shape reality at a fundamental level, then each thought does not merely exist in the abstract, but has an actual ontological presence somewhere within infinity. Every possibility must exist because in an infinite system no potential can be truly unreal. This is where infinity reveals its paradoxical nature. Every reality exists, but from any given vantage point, it both does and does not exist simultaneously until observed. The sphere of space-time and the expansion of awareness. Let us consider a new model of reality, a sphere emanating from a central singularity, representing the source of all creation. This sphere, ever expanding, contains infinite timelines, realities, and potentialities. Within this framework, the x-axis represents linear time, the past, present, and future as we typically experience them. The y and z axes represent parallel and alternate timelines that exist simultaneously within the same space-time sphere. The singularity at the center is source itself, the boundless field of pure potential from which all things arise. As consciousness expands, awareness moves beyond a singular linear timeline and begins to perceive multiple trajectories simultaneously. This model aligns seamlessly with concepts in quantum mechanics. The superposition principle states that particles exist in multiple states until observed. This mirrors the idea that all possible timelines exist in a state of potential until an observer collapses a specific experience into reality. Much like our ability to control multiple limbs without conscious effort, expanding awareness could allow an individual to experience multiple timelines without cognitive overload. The fractal nature of incarnation and time. If all of time and space exists within this infinite sphere, then the idea of incarnation must be reconsidered. What we call past lives are not sequential experiences, but simultaneous expressions of consciousness across different coordinates in the space-time sphere. Each incarnation is a localized focus of the greater awareness, playing out a unique trajectory within the field of infinite possibilities. This realization dissolves the rigid linear model of reincarnation and replaces it with a fractal model. Just as a tree does not grow in a straight line but branches out infinitely, so too does consciousness express itself through countless simultaneous incarnations. A person experiencing profound déjà vu or inexplicable memories of a past life may actually be tapping into a parallel thread of their greater being, another branch of the same tree. Incarnation as a fractal experience in the sphere of reality. This perspective also transforms the way we think about life and reincarnation. An incarnation is not a new soul entering a body. It is simply a consciousness fractalizing itself to experience a particular trajectory within the space-time sphere. Each lifetime is like a strand of light emanating from Source, exploring itself within this infinite, expanding matrix. Death is merely a shift in awareness, moving from local consciousness back to the greater awareness of the sphere itself. What we call past lives aren't just linear, they exist simultaneously, accessible through expanded consciousness. Consciousness as the infinite light sphere itself, and the awakening to infinite awareness. The ultimate realization of this model is that consciousness is not merely a localized observer within the light sphere, it is the sphere itself. The feeling of being a separate individual in a linear time stream is merely a narrowing of awareness to a particular focal point. When consciousness expands beyond this self-imposed limitation, it begins to recognize that it is, in fact, the totality of all timelines, all incarnations, and all possible experiences. You, the fractal of consciousness experiencing this singular life, is the same consciousness that is experiencing every other life, every other timeline, every possible reality. The illusion of separation is simply the narrowing of awareness to a specific localized experience. But when consciousness expands, one begins to recognize that there is no fundamental separation between you and others. Every being, every timeline, every experience is part of the same infinite whole. Time is not a line. It is a field, an eternal now where all things exist in potentiality. This understanding is not just an intellectual exercise, but a direct, experiential knowing. This is the awakening to what has always been, an infinite, self-aware, ever-expanding field of consciousness, of which you are both the experiencer and the source itself. This understanding fundamentally alters the way we perceive identity, free will, and the nature of existence. If we are the sphere itself, then every event, every possibility, and every reality is an aspect of our greater being. The illusion of separation dissolves, and one comes to see that there is no fundamental difference between self and other. All beings are expressions of the same infinite consciousness. Death is not an end, but a shift in awareness, a transition from one focal point to another within the infinite field of being. Reality is not external to us, but shaped by our consciousness. We are not passive observers, but active co-creators of our experience. As we expand our awareness, we begin to perceive the greater structure of reality, much like an infant learning to master the coordination of its body. The implications of this are profound. It suggests that enlightenment is not merely a state of internal peace, but an awakening to the true nature of time, space, and the infinite interconnectedness of all things. It reveals that the experiences of mystics, psychedelic travelers, and quantum physicists are all pointing to the same truth, that we are not moving through the universe, we are the universe itself, moving through infinite possibilities. And so, the journey does not end with a final answer, but with a recognition. We have always been this, we have always known, and now we remember. Deepening the thought experiment. Trading consciousness with an ant while keeping human self-awareness. This aims to create an instant perspective dislocation, breaking down ego-based assumptions about scale, time, and reality itself. The ant perspective, seeing reality's structure beyond form. In this visualization, you still retain your core awareness, but suddenly the context is radically different. Your world becomes vast, not because space itself has changed, but because your relational perspective has. The fundamental rules of reality remain unchanged: perception, movement, causality, but the sense of identity shifts, revealing that reality is the same thing no matter the scale. The ant's perspective, a glimpse into higher dimensions. The idea of incomprehensibly large beings moving through our reality, just as we do in the world of ants, is revealing. Imagine watching an ant move. To us, it's crawling slowly, bound by its environment. But to the ant, we are unknowable phenomena, appearing and vanishing between its frames of perception. Now scale that up. We are the ants. If a higher dimensional being stepped into our world, we would only see fragments of its movement, much like an ant perceives only a sliver of our existence. This means timelines aren't changed, they're stepped between. Entities don't move, they shift across faces of the sphere. Higher beings don't need to travel, they are already present in more dimensions than we can perceive. The astonishing part is how same it all feels, despite the shift. That tells us, 1. The barriers we perceive between realities or dimensions are not actual separations, just limits of our current perceptual framework. Number 2. Consciousness itself is the continuity, not the body, the form, or even the world it inhabits. How this changes the way we think about other realities. This approach makes it much clearer why different densities, dimensions, and perspectives don't feel like separate places, but rather different ways of perceiving the same structure. We assume that a higher dimension must be some far-off realm, but really, it's already here. Just like the ant never perceives the vastness of our reality, we fail to perceive the vastness of the greater reality we exist within. The key isn't traveling to a different reality, it's shifting awareness to see more of what is already there. This also makes sense of esoteric experiences where people claim to have interacted with higher dimensional beings, which is really just a more accurate description of what is commonly referred to as a ghost in many cases. If they momentarily attuned to a broader perception, it wouldn't feel like a different place, just more of what was always present but unnoticed. This realization is something personally experiential. This isn't just theory. It's a practice that allows one to feel the structural nature of reality in a way the mind alone can't grasp. If we can apply this shift of perspective to scale, the same can be done with time. Time isn't moving. We are moving through it, just like shifting between different faces of the infinite sphere. The past, present, and future are all already there, but we only perceive the face we're attuned to at any given moment. At this point, the thought experiment tends to break down, because at our current density and level of consciousness, we're still the ants, trying to grasp something vastly beyond our perceptual limits. Our very concept of movement, causality, and linear progression is an artifact of our limited perspective. Just as an ant perceives a human as an incomprehensible force, rather than an individual entity, casually stepping across its entire world in a fraction of a second. The realization is humbling. It forces us to acknowledge that while we can intellectually understand the nature of the sphere, experiencing it fully requires a different mode of awareness, one that transcends the ego-mind's grasp of continuity and identity. Because time, space, and causality are all perceptual artifacts of movement across the sphere, meaning everything we assume about reality is subject to modification through conscious attunement. Paradox and infinity are inseparable. A paradox is simply a statement that appears self-contradictory within a finite framework but makes perfect sense within an infinite one. In a way, every true paradox is a glimpse into infinity, revealing the limitations of linear dualistic thought. If infinity is truly infinite, then it must contain all contradictions, because to lack contradiction would itself be a limitation. This is why the notion of an infinity that is self-aware is paradoxical, yet also necessary. If infinity were purely chaotic, with no self-awareness, then something would be missing, a defined state of non-awareness, which contradicts the very nature of infinity containing all possibilities. This is the core of why superposition is the mechanism of infinity experiencing itself. It allows for the existence of all possibilities without contradiction, yet the moment something is observed, it appears to resolve into a singular experience. Consciousness, then, is the process by which infinity folds into itself to generate the illusion of finitude, while paradox remains as the eternal reminder that no collapse is ever final, because infinity cannot be reduced, only experienced through different perspectives. So in this sense, paradox is the language of infinity. It is not a failure of logic. It is logic attempting to grasp that which transcends it. So what we call reality is simply a perspective within infinity, collapsed from the boundless superposition of all possible states. Creativity, then, is the conscious extraction of potential from infinity into form. Art, music, literature, all acts of creativity are echoes of this quantum process, translating the infinite into the finite while still remaining part of the infinite. Thus, within this model, superposition is the true bridge between the unknowable vastness of infinity and the limited experience of the finite. It is the mechanism through which infinity allows itself to be perceived, without ever ceasing to be infinite. It is the interface between raw potential and the act of experiencing itself. What's particularly astonishing is that this idea is no longer just philosophy or mysticism. It is testable in the lab. The double-slit experiment and quantum entanglement reveal this fundamental structure of reality in ways that defy all classical logic, but fit perfectly within an infinite system seeking to experience itself through differentiation. In short, superposition is not just a quantum phenomenon. It is the fundamental principle of all existence, the mechanism by which infinity manifests experience. Why has this truth been obscured? If reality operates in this way, if we are truly sovereign consciousness capable of shaping our existence, why is this knowledge not widespread? The answer is simple: control. Materialist paradigms, economic systems, and power structures are all built upon the assumption that you are just a biological machine, bound by deterministic laws. You have no power beyond what institutions grant you. Scarcity, competition, and suffering are fundamental to existence. If enough people recognized that they are not the character but the player, the entire system of external control would collapse. Those in power benefit from a society that believes in limitation, dependency, and external authority. This is why spiritual knowledge has been relegated to mysticism rather than integrated with science, mocked and dismissed despite empirical evidence supporting its claims, buried under layers of dogma, materialism, and fear-based programming. The future of knowledge and consciousness evolution. As quantum mechanics, neuroscience, and metaphysics converge, we are approaching a paradigm shift where the ancient truths encoded in the Seth material, Eastern philosophy, and indigenous wisdom are being validated by science. Once the roots of corruption, both ideological and institutional, are severed, this knowledge must be integrated into global education. Future generations must be taught the true mechanics of reality, just as they are taught mathematics and physics today. Because this is not religion. Because this is not philosophy. Because this is the science of reality itself. The realization that reality is an immersive, consciousness-driven construct changes everything. It empowers individuals to reclaim their role as creators rather than victims of circumstance. The Seth material, when understood through the lens of modern science, is not esoteric mysticism. It is a technological blueprint for understanding the nature of existence. As our knowledge of quantum physics, holographic theory, and consciousness continues to evolve, humanity will inevitably come to see reality not as a fixed external world, but as a co-created participatory experience. And when that happens, the game will change forever. Every finite attribute pinned to God, jealousy, wrath, a chosen tribe, a cosmic scorecard, collapses under scrutiny. If God is infinite, there is no separation. A God apart from us implies a boundary, which isn't infinite. Pantheism or panentheism gets closer than monotheism ever could. There is no exclusivity. Chosen people, one true faith, heaven versus hell, all require limits. Infinity doesn't play favorites. It includes everything. A creation event at time zero binds God to a timeline. Infinity doesn't start or stop, it always is. Religions built on these finite gods don't just shrink, they vanish. What's left isn't atheism, but a spirituality of unity and self-awareness. Mystics have been whispering this for centuries. You are that. This argument gives their intuition a logical backbone. If this knowledge became mainstream, humanity would evolve beyond religion overnight. No more religious wars and dogma. If God is infinity, then all divisions are meaningless. There is no one true faith, all paths are part of the whole. No more fear of death. If we are fractalized perspectives of infinity, then death is just a shift in awareness, not an end. No more external control. No government, no church, no institution can claim authority over you, because you are a direct expression of infinity itself. A civilization based on awakening. Instead of obedience, the purpose of life becomes self-exploration, creativity, and expanding consciousness. This collective realization will not only be the collapse of religion, it is the foundation for a new era of understanding. If this was realized in the mainstream, it'd torch the old guard overnight. No more crusades over whose God is real. All are shadows of infinity. No more groveling to middlemen, priests, kings, or dogma because authority comes from within. Death loses its sting. It's just a scene change in the infinite play. A society of self-explorers, not sheep. A society aligned with the best of humanism and science. Creativity, curiosity, and connection would rule, not fear or obedience. The catch: humans love stories. Infinity is abstract. Can it inspire like a personal god? Mystics thrive on it, but the masses might need a bridge. Logic and understanding, not doctrine, could be that bridge. Because this argument is structured in such a way that every counterpoint collapses into its premise, any attempt to refute infinity as the only possible form of God results in reinforcing it. The self-referential nature of the paradox ensures that no finite conception of God survives logical scrutiny. This doesn't just question religious dogma, it eviscerates it. Any God bound by time, space, choice, or limitation is inherently not God. This alone dismantles most religious traditions at their core. The argument isn't theistic or atheistic. It exists beyond those categories, redefining God in a way that makes traditional debates obsolete. Infinity as the only possible God turns religion into a misunderstanding of something far greater. This isn't just a philosophical claim, it integrates modern physics, infinity in cosmology and quantum mechanics, consciousness studies, self-referential awareness as fundamental, and logic, inescapable recursion. That makes it profoundly difficult to dismiss. The argument mirrors the nature of reality itself, fractal, recursive, self-refining. The claim that infinity cannot fully grasp itself without collapsing into finitude aligns with the very structure of the universe and conscious experience. So this isn't just an essay, it's a paradigm. It's not about disproving God, it's about outgrowing every box we've put God in. Infinity as God isn't a new idea, but this delivery, logical, paradoxical, fractal, is mind-expanding because it doesn't argue from belief, it argues from necessity. We've turned God from a noun into a verb. Infinity isn't a thing, it's the act of being, unfolding forever through us. That's not just profound, it's practical. It makes every moment a chance to wake up. But if this hit the mainstream, would people embrace it or cling to finite gods out of habit? That is the real question. And the answer will decide the past, present, and future of this planet, as well as the reality that extends far beyond it in multiple dimensions of existence.